You'll have to make your own dinner tonight. That's the way my wife greeted me when I got home from work that Friday evening. Helen walked into the living room fiddling with an earring. I'm going out dancing with friends. I stared at her in disbelief. She was wearing a short black dress with a plunging neckline held up by 4 spaghetti straps that crisscrossed over her shoulders. When she turned away from me, I couldn't help noticing how the folds of her skirt fluttered around her thighs. Then I saw the open back, which made it clear that Helen wasn't wearing a bra. You're going out dancing dressed like that? Why? What's wrong with what I'm wearing? It's very stylish. I felt my anger growing, but knew I had to be careful about what I said next if I wanted any chance of getting through to her. There's nothing wrong with your outfit, but you're showing a lot of skin. Don't you think you're going to attract the wrong kind of attention, especially from men? She gave a little snort. If Nancy and I dance with any men while we're out, I'm sure they'll be perfect gentlemen. You can't be sure of that. For all you know, one of them could be the ring collector, and you sure don't want to attract his attention. The ring collector was the nickname the media had given to the serial killer who'd been terrorizing the area. He'd sexually assaulted and strangled 8 young women in the last year. The only clue the police had was that each victim was missing her rings when she was found, and the speculation was that the madman was building a grisly collection. Helen's mocking response came in a little girl's voice. Ooh, Daddy, is the boogeyman going to get me? Then her voice returned to its normal contemptuous tone. It's so pathetic that you're trying to control me with ghost stories. Before she could elaborate, a honk from a car horn sounded out front. I don't have time for this, she spat. Nancy's here. Don't wait up for me. And with that she was gone. God damn it, I swore, standing alone in the living room with my fists clenched in helpless anger. This kind of disrespect had grown increasingly frequent of late, and I didn't know how much longer I could take it. I loved Helen, but our relationship seemed to have been in a downward spiral for a long time now. What happened to us? I wondered. How did it get so bad? We'd been crazy in love when we got married after graduation, and Helen had been so supportive when I went to business school for my MBA. By taking a secretarial job to support us, she enabled me to get my degree in 18 months. It hadn't been easy on her, and I'd always be grateful for her sacrifice. Then, while I was trying to line up a job, my father had died, leaving his business to my brother Billy and me. Preferred Precision Moldings made custom plastic parts for industrial use. The business had been in a slow decline for a while, but Billy and I thought we could make something out of it. Billy took over running operations and I handle sales and general management. It's a specialty business built on relationships and performance. Slowly, Billy and I began rebuilding our reputation as a quality supplier. She never said anything, but I know Helen was disappointed I didn't wind up in the executive suite of a Fortune 500 company in a major city. Nevertheless, she endured my long hours and meager paychecks without complaint. However, when she got the opportunity to move into advertising, she jumped at it and almost immediately showed an aptitude for the work. At first, that had been a boost for us. Her growing paycheck really helped our financial situation, and her growing self-confidence boosted her attitude. Over time, however, things between us seemed to cool. She spent more and more time with her new work associates, especially Nancy, a divorcee I thought was a bad influence. But my concerns were of little or no importance to Helen, as tonight's confrontation showed. Well, the hell with her, I thought. I'll be damned if I'm going to sit around home waiting for her to come prancing in who know when. With that, I gave my little brother a call. Hey, Billy, are you doing anything tonight? Okay, well, how about meeting me at Louie's tonight? Helen's gone out again, and I'd like some company. Louie's was nearby, and I liked to go there because it wasn't too noisy and they play jazz in the background. They also made good burgers to go with the booze. Billy was waiting for me when I walked in, and he already had a beer waiting for me. From the sound of your voice, he grinned at me, I figured you could use one. What's your bride done this time to get you so upset? I still thought of Billy as my little brother because he was 2 years younger than me, but he'd grown up to be every bit as tall as me. When we were growing up, I used to win our wrestling matches every time, but I doubt I could do it today. Now he was my wingman and my confidant. I took a big gulp from the mug in front of me and then looked at him. What makes you think Helen's done something to upset me? He shook his head knowingly. It's always Helen lately. I don't know what's going on with you too, but that woman is definitely getting under your skin big time. Is it that obvious? When he didn't answer, I sighed and shrugged my shoulders. Everything was fine until she went to work for the Browder agency. She was excited about the opportunity, and things were really good between us for a while. But the more time she spent in that world and with those people, the worse things have become at home. It's like she doesn't have any respect for me anymore. Nothing I do is good enough for her, and she takes every opportunity to get away from me. Frankly, I'm starting to wonder why I married her." He leered at me and cupped both hands over his chest. "I know exactly why you married her, bro." I shook my head in disgust. "You always were a horn dog. Anyway, I'm not getting a lot of action in that area either these days. I don't know how much more of this I can take." Billy turned and signaled to the waitress for another round. After she brought it, he leaned toward me and asked in a low voice, "Do you think Helen's running around on you?" I took another big swig and my face curled into a scowl. "That's exactly what I'm thinking. The only thing is I can't figure out if she's having an affair or just picking up random guys when she's out with that witch Nancy." I could feel my anger building, and I took another swallow to try to cool down. Looking back, things between us started going sour after she took that new job. Now she's always working late or going into the office on weekends. That makes me wonder if she's having an affair with somebody at work. But she also keeps going out with Nancy, and she won't tell me where they are or when they'll be home. Last weekend, she didn't get back till after I'd gone to bed, but she insisted on getting a shower when she got home. She said she wanted to get the smell of cigarette smoke off her, but that sounded like an excuse to me. Billy looked at me carefully. "Are you two headed for divorce?" I slammed my hand down on the table hard enough to make the beer mugs jump. Damn it, that's what's really getting to me. The disrespect is bad enough. I couldn't tolerate her cheating on me. But if I divorce her, we'll have to split all our assets, and she'll wind up with half my share of the business. Damn, Mickey, that really sucks, especially now that things are starting to pick up. The order you landed last week could really pay off for us big time. I know, bro, and the idea of her walking away with a big chunk of everything we've been working and slaving for really chaps my ass. By now I was in full rant mode, and as the evening wore on, I lost count of how many beers I had. It didn't seem like it was that many, but I never got around to having anything to eat. At some point, I vaguely remember Billy helping me out to my car and driving me home. He half carried me to the bedroom and dumped me on the bed. I kicked off my shoes, and that was the last thing I remembered. It was almost noon on Saturday when I finally woke. Oh, God, my head hurt so bad, and there was a bitter taste in mouth. I struggled to the bathroom, filled a glass with water, and took a handful of aspirin. Then I hurried to the kitchen to make myself some breakfast before all that acid burned a hole in my stomach. After I finished eating, I called my brother. When he heard my voice, Billy laughed. "I was wondering if you were up yet. Man, you really tied one on last night." "Yeah, well, thanks for getting me home safely last night. I hope I didn't do anything crazy. How much did I drink, anyway? I don't ever remember blacking out like that, even in college." He laughed again. "It's all part of the service. Just remember that you owe me." Then his voice changed tone. "So what did Helen say when you finally got up?" I sat up straight. "Damn, Billy, I haven't seen her. She sure wasn't in bed when I woke up." I got up from the table and began to walk through the house while I talked to him, just to make sure. "I don't think she came home last night. She's definitely not here now, and her car's still parked in the garage. That witch must have stayed out all night. Goddamn, I am not going to tolerate this kind of disrespect." "Whoa, hold on, big brother. She could have a good explanation. Come to think of it, she probably spent the night at Nancy's place. Why don't you give a call over there?" "No, she's got a phone. Let her call me. I'm tired of having to track down my own wife." "I know where you're coming from, bro, but don't make any decisions until you two have had a chance to talk it out." "I hear you, but to be honest, I hope she doesn't show up anytime soon because I'm so mad at her right now, I don't know what I'd do. Anyway, thanks again for last night. Now, let me go do some yard work. Maybe that will cool me off some." After I hung up, I changed into my work jeans and headed out to the garage to get the lawnmower. When I sat down to pull on my work boots, I was surprised to find them covered in mud. Where the hell did that come from? I wondered. I'm usually pretty scrupulous about cleaning up after myself. I like mowing the yard because it gives me an opportunity to think without a lot of distractions. But this time, I couldn't stop thinking about Helen and how angry I was at the way she'd been acting. This isn't just disrespect, it's downright contempt. I really don't care whether she's having an affair or not. I'm not going to stand for this kind of treatment from her. I finished up the yard and checked my phone just to make sure she hadn't called and I'd missed it. No missed calls, no text messages. I watched a baseball game on television, then went to the kitchen and fixed myself some dinner out of leftovers. After that, it was back to the TV to watch a movie I'd already seen once. Good guys fighting zombies, lots of violence that suited my mood. The later it got, the madder I grew. Finally, I switched off the TV and grabbed my phone. "All right, witch, you win. I called her, but all I got was a message that the phone was not in service. She turned off her phone so I couldn't call her? Just unbelievable. I got undressed and went to bed, but it took me forever to drop off to sleep. In the morning, I woke up disoriented. My skin felt clammy and the sheets were damp. Even worse, my mood was dark and troubled. I felt as though I'd been dreaming all night, and the dreams were really disturbing. I couldn't remember many details. All I could knew was that I'd been intensely angry at Helen. No, not anger. What I felt was hatred. It was actually a little frightening to remember how strong my emotions were. Even after I'd had coffee and breakfast, I couldn't shake the terrible memory of those dreams, and I started to feel guilty. I tried calling Helen again, but got the same out-of-service message. Swallowing my distaste, I called Nancy. It was pretty obvious that I'd awakened her because it took a few seconds for her to realize who I was. Nancy, is Helen there with you? No, she's not. Was she with you yesterday? No, I thought she went home. Is she not there? Nancy, this is important. When was the last time you saw Helen? It was Friday night. We were out dancing at Singles and Doubles. I rolled my eyes at that. Singles and Doubles was a real meat market. What time did you leave? There was a pause. Well, I left sometime after midnight. Did Helen leave with you? A longer pause. Actually, I sort of met a guy I was interested in, but Helen was having a good time and wanted to stay. She told me she'd call an Uber when she was ready, so I left with the guy. So you haven't seen or heard from her since? No, I haven't. Listen, you're starting to scare me, Mickey. You really haven't heard from her all weekend? Nancy, I don't have time to talk now. I need to try to find my wife. I hung up and cursed, then called Billy and told him what Nancy had said. Bro, that doesn't sound good. I think you ought to call the police and report her missing. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I'll let you know what they have to say. That proved to be a total waste of time. When I called police headquarters, the first thing the officer asked was when I'd last seen Helen. When I told him Friday night, he cut me short. Listen, buddy, you can't even file a missing persons report until she's been gone 3 days. Damn it, officer, I haven't seen or heard from her all weekend, and neither has her best friend. I'm afraid something may have happened to her. Look, he said, don't worry too much. I've seen the same thing dozens of times. The odds are you'll hear from her soon and everything will be okay. Just give it a little more time. I hung up. Maybe he was right, but I wasn't reassured. This just wasn't like her. What if she's been in an accident? But if she was, the doctors would call me, wouldn't they? Still, I figured it wouldn't hurt, so I called the local hospitals. Helen wasn't checked in at any of them, and they didn't have any unknown female patients. Another dead end. I went out and picked up some food for myself, then hurried home to eat it in case Helen showed up. While I waited, I tried to distract myself by watching TV again, but I couldn't concentrate. Finally, I gave up and went to bed. In some ways, Sunday night was worse than Saturday. Again, I found myself sleeping restlessly. What's worse, this time I kept having the same dream. I was lost, trudging through a dark forest, weighted down by a heavy burden. I wasn't angry. Instead, all I felt was hopelessness and despair. The last time I woke up, it was still dark outside, but I got up anyway because I couldn't bear feeling so depressed. It took me eating breakfast and drinking several cups of coffee before I started to shake off the sense of foreboding. At 7:30 a.m., I called Billy. Listen, I'm going to be late this morning. I still haven't seen or heard from Helen. I'm going to check with her office when it opens, just in case she shows up there. If she doesn't, I'm going to police headquarters and demand to see someone. Okay, I'll hold down the fort here. Good luck, bro, and keep the faith. A half hour later, I called the Browder agency and got Frankie, Helen's personal assistant. When I first heard about Frankie, I got a little jealous at the idea of Helen having a male PA. Helen just laughed at me and told me I was being sexist. It wasn't until I met Frankie at a company event that I got Helen's joke. Frankie was short for Francesca, and like her nickname, Frankie was one of the least feminine women I'd ever seen. She wasn't overweight, but she was tall and blocky with an extremely mannish figure. Truthfully, she looked like she could play linebacker on some college teams. She was also strong. The first time I shook hands with her, she gave me a manly grip that startled me with its strength. The other thing I discovered about Frankie was she was absolutely devoted to Helen. After seeing the two of them together a few times, I decided Frankie was probably gay and had a crush on my wife. I asked Helen about it once, and she just laughed. Of course she's a lesbian, but it doesn't bother me. Actually, it makes her perfect for my PA. She'd do anything for me. She's more like a servant than an employee. Hearing Frankie's contralto voice on the phone broke my reverie. Hi, Frankie, it's Mickey Duncan. Is Helen in the office yet? Hello, Mr. Duncan. It's good to hear your voice. No, your wife hasn't gotten in yet. Shall I have her call you when she arrives? Yes, please have her call first thing. Something in my voice must have sounded off to Frankie. Is everything okay, Mr. Duncan? To my dismay, I found myself telling Frankie everything. How we'd argued when she went out on Friday, and how I hadn't seen or heard anything from her all weekend. Frankie listened quietly until I'd finished. When she finally spoke, her voice was hushed and her tone was troubled. I'm so sorry to hear that. Her voice dropped even lower. I can't talk about this now, but there are things going on around here that aren't right. If I were you, I'd go see Mr. Browder and find out what's going on with Helen. Suddenly, her voice resumed its normal tone and volume. Yes, sir, that's right. Mr. Browder will be in the office later this morning. Goodbye now. I sat there holding the dead phone and feeling my blood pressure rising. I hadn't liked Darren Browder from the first time I met him. He was one of those slick, good-looking guys who always seemed too full of himself. He never missed an opportunity to brag on his advertising agency or himself, nor was he shy about denigrating anyone else in the process. Maybe those characteristics made him a good man, but as far as I was concerned, they made him an insecure, unattractive human being. So what had Frankie been hinting at when she said I ought to direct my questions to Dandy Darren? I had a sneaking suspicion I knew, and I meant to confront him as soon as possible. But first, I needed to get to police headquarters. The sergeant at the front desk wasn't very helpful, but I guess I made enough of a fuss that eventually a woman came out to see me. I'm Detective Nora Marshall. She introduced herself after the sergeant explained my problem. She looked young and inexperienced to my eyes, but at least she was willing to listen, so I followed her back to her desk. I went through my story again, but she didn't seem particularly responsive. When I gave her a picture of Helen, she leaned back in her chair and covered her mouth to yawn. That was the last straw for me. Look, if you were out partying too hard over the weekend, how about letting me talk to someone who gives a damn? She rocked forward and her eyes flashed. If you think I don't care, Mr. Duncan, you're badly mistaken. I wouldn't have taken this job if I didn't care deeply. And for your information, the reason I was yawning is I was on duty the whole weekend, and I spent most of last night trying to track down a mentally ill young woman who wandered away from her group home. So back off and tell me again why you think your wife isn't just another runaway spouse who's wasting police time. I felt like crap after that, but I straightened up and tried to explain why I was so concerned about Helen's disappearance. She's gone out with her girlfriend before, but she doesn't stay out all night, and she's never been gone for a whole weekend. How often does she go out without you? I squirmed in embarrassment. Lately, it's been almost every weekend. Marshall made a note on the pad in front of her. Then she looked at me carefully. So how would you describe your relationship with your wife? I looked down at the desk and sighed. Look, I'm not gonna lie to you. It's been a little rocky lately. I looked at her. It's almost like she's lost respect for me, you know? Do you two ever fight? Yeah, we've had some pretty heated arguments from time to time. Did you ever hit her? I was shocked. God, no. I would never do that. She waited for me to go on, but I couldn't think of anything else to say. Finally, she sighed. All right, Mr. Duncan, I'll add your wife to our missing persons list, and we'll circulate her photo to our street patrol. If we find anything, I'll call you. I hadn't wanted to say anything, but it just popped out of my mouth. You don't think there's any chance she ran into this ring collector guy and... Look, I know you're worried, but you can drive yourself crazy imagining unlikely scenarios. In the great majority of situations like this, the missing spouse just decided he or she wanted some time alone. After a while, they realize they can't work out their problems long distance and they come home. My advice for you is to stop worrying and go back to work. Let the professionals find your wife and bring her home, okay? Reluctantly, I nodded. She reached into a little pouch and pulled out a card. Here's my name and number. If she comes home or you hear from her, call me anytime, day or night. She handed the card to me. We really do care, even if it may not seem that way to you. I took the card and nodded sheepishly. All right, Detective Marshall. Thanks. After I left, I called Billy to let him know what I was doing, then headed straight for the Browder agency. I'd had my suspicions about Darren Browder anyway, and Frankie's cryptic comments made me want to confront him even more. The receptionist let me in because she recognized me, and as I walked past Helen's office, I paused to raise my eyebrows at Frankie in a silent question. She shook her head negatively. All right, I said quietly, then it's time I have it out with Browder. She grabbed my hand and squeezed it. "Good luck," she whispered. I walked down the hall to Browder's office, rubbing my fingers. "Damn, that woman is strong." "Oh, Mr. Duncan," Browder's secretary exclaimed when I walked up to her desk. "Is he in?" I asked, and she frowned. "Yes, but he's busy right now and—" "Wait, you can't go in there." But I already had, and saw Browder on the phone. When he spotted me and the expression on my face, he spoke hurriedly into the handset. "I'll have to call you back." After he hung up, he stood and pasted a false smile on his face. "Well, Mickey, this is a pleasant surprise. Come in and have a seat." He waved me toward the big couch on one side of his office. I sat down and leaned toward him intently. "This isn't a social call, Browder. I want to know what's going on between you and my wife." For a moment, I thought I saw his gaze waver, but his smile stayed firmly fixed on his face. "Ah, Helen, what an addition your wife been to the business. She brings a real lust for every challenge working here presents. Time and again, I've seen her take a big problem in her grasp and squeeze it into a satisfying conclusion. In fact, just last week it was my pleasure to administer her performance evaluation right on that couch. I can assure you she was satisfying in every way." He gave me a smirk. "I'm very grateful to have her working under me." The more I listened and watched that gloating smile, the angrier I got. That sonophage, he's mocking me. He's bragging about screwing Helen to my face. As I pushed down on the couch to stand up and confront him, my fingers slid between the cushions of the sofa and touched something unexpected. When I pulled it out to see, I found myself holding a flimsy pair of panties. I looked at them again and gasped. There was no doubt in my mind. They were part of the set I'd given Helen last Valentine's Day. Browder calmly reached over and snatched them out of my hands. Well, looks like the cleaning crew has been enjoying their work more than I realized," he quipped. Just then the door to his office flew open and a uniformed guard stepped inside. "Ah, you're just in time," Browder nodded to the man. "Mr. Duncan was just leaving." "Not so fast, Browder. You and I have a lot more to talk about." "Sorry, Mickey, but I'm afraid you've already taken up too much of my schedule." He motioned to the guard. "Please escort Mr. Duncan to the exit." The guard stepped to my side and gestured toward the door. I started to resist, but then thought better of it. As I stalked out of his office, I turned back to Browder. "This isn't over, not by a long shot." I didn't see Frankie when I walked down the hall. Maybe it was just as well. When I got out to my car, I was still seething. After making sure I hadn't missed a call from Helen, I pulled out the card that Detective Marshall had given me and called her number. When she answered, I was so upset that I was spluttering. "Listen, you need to get over to the Browder agency and interrogate Darren Browder. He's having an affair with my wife, and he may know something about her disappearance." She sighed. "So this is you going back to work and letting the police handle things?" I shifted uncomfortably. "Well, no, but I've had my doubts about that creep for a while now. Anyway, I wanted to see if Helen had gone into work this morning." So your wife's boss admitted having an affair with your wife?" "Well, not exactly, but he was mocking me about it. And anyway, I got proof, evidence. I told her about my wife's panties stuffed down in Browder's sofa." "And you have the panties with you?" No, Browder grabbed them out of my hand. But I'll bet they're still there." I heard her take a deep breath. "All right, Mr. Duncan, I want you to listen carefully and do exactly as I say." "Sure. Anything. I want you to get in your car and drive straight to your office. When you get there, I want you to bury yourself in your normal duties and stop playing detective. Do you understand?" "But what about Browder?" "We'll talk to him, along with all the other people whose names you gave me. But if you go interfering anymore, you're more likely to get in our way than do any good. Now, do you understand what I'm telling you?" Now I was the one to sigh. "Yes, teacher, I understand. I'll be good." She laughed at my tone. "Good boy. Now behave yourself," and she hung up. After I got to the office, I had to tell Billy what had happened. When I described my conversation with Browder, he couldn't hide his expression. "It's a good thing you were there, and not me. If he'd pulled that shit on me, I'd have decked him." "Yeah, but I've already got Detective Marshall pissed at me as it is. There's no telling what she might do if I'd punch Browder out." For the rest of the day, I tried to concentrate on work, but it wasn't easy. I'd start thinking about Browder and his suggestive innuendos about Helen, and my blood pressure would rise. Then I'd begin thinking about Helen, and I'd grow even angrier. I was so distracted that I had a hard time concentrating on the business. As a result, I wound up working late to try to catch up. Then I stopped at a fast food outlet on the way home and picked up something for dinner, because I didn't want to be away if Helen showed up. But she didn't. I guess the greasy food must have unsettled my stomach, because once again I tossed and turned all night. I dozed for a while and then wake up and roll over. Every time I did, I'd remember what I'd been dreaming about. This time my dreams were filled with Helen and Browder. Sometimes they were belittling me, other times they were locked in each other's arms and laughing at me. One time, Detective Marshall even showed up and began lecturing me. By the time my alarm clock went off at 6 a.m., I was glad to get out of bed. I had just finished my breakfast when the doorbell rang. "It's Helen," I thought, and dashed to the door. But when I opened it, I was startled to see Detective Marshall standing there with a solemn expression. "Mr. Duncan, Mickey, I'm so sorry to have to tell you this, but I think we found your wife's body." I staggered backward, my voice catching in my throat. The possibility had always been in the back of my mind, but I'd been so angry at Helen that I never thought we wouldn't have the chance to hash things out. What happened?" Her face was a mask. "Let's go sit down." She walked past me into the living room, and I followed blindly. When we were both seated, the mask slipped off to reveal compassion. "I'm so sorry, but it appears that she was assaulted and then strangled." "The ring collector?" I gasped. "It certainly looks like it. The MO was similar and her rings are missing." I shuddered. Pain washed over me, mixed with anger at the maniac who'd done this terrible thing and anger at myself for the terrible things I'd thought about Helen before I knew what had happened to her. "Where was she?" I asked. "We found the body in Burnham Woods." A chill gripped me. I'd played in those woods when I was growing up. I knew the area like my own backyard. I looked at the floor so Marshall wouldn't see the uneasiness in my eyes. "Mickey," she interrupted my thoughts, "I really hate to do this, but we need you to come down to the morgue to identify the body." I looked up quickly. "You mean there's a chance it's not her?" She reached over and took my hand. "You shouldn't get your hopes up. I'm afraid this is just a formality." There was nothing I could say to that. She offered me a ride, and I decided to take her up on it. At that moment, I wasn't sure I could drive. I'd never been in a morgue before. It looked and smelled a lot like a hospital. Except that nobody gets well and goes home, I thought morbidly. We went into the refrigeration room. Nora checked a list carefully, then opened a square-numbered door in a wall full of them, like opening a safe deposit box. She pulled the sliding table out and carefully unzipped the thick black plastic bag. When she pulled back the flap, I forced myself to look. It was her. The last time I'd seen Helen, her face had been twisted in contempt. Now her face was relaxed, and it was easy to remember how beautiful I'd thought she was when we got married. The only difference was that her cheeks, her lips, her entire face was a sickly off-white, the color of melted wax. I looked away, not wanting to remember her like that. Out in the waiting room, the detective surprised me. "While we're here, there's something else you need to do. I need to get a DNA swab from you." "What?" "I don't understand." "Why?" "It's routine. When we do the autopsy, we need to have your DNA so we can rule it out if we find any of your semen, inside her." "Okay, I guess, if it'll help find the monster who did this." It took no time for her to run the swab on the inside of my cheek, and then we were heading back to my house. Everything along the way looked completely ordinary, and nothing looked familiar at all. I turned to her. "I guess I need to get started on the funeral arrangements." A sad expression came over her face. "It'll be a while before the body is released. They have to perform the autopsy, and then they'll hold it in evidence. They'll notify you." I couldn't think of anything to say to that. When she let me off at home, she made a point of looking me in the eye. "We're going to find the man who did this, Mickey. He won't get away." I just nodded. When she'd left, I called Billy to let him know what had happened. "Oh, damn, Mickey, I can't believe this. It's like a nightmare. Listen, stay where you are. I'm coming right over to be with you." "No, Billy, don't do that. I really need you to call everybody who needs to know and give them the bad news. I just don't think I can handle that right now. And besides, somebody needs to keep the business running. Just give me a little time to be alone." He tried to protest, but I eventually talked him into doing what I'd asked. After he'd hung up, I decided I needed to make a call, one Billy wouldn't think about. When I told Frankie the terrible news, I braced myself for tears and worse. Instead, I heard her give a sharp intake of breath followed by silence. Just when I started to ask if she was all right, she suddenly cried out, "Oh, Mickey, I'm going to miss her so much." Then she wanted to know about me and how I was doing. I thanked her for her concern and told her I'd stay in touch. After we hung up, I shook my head. I always knew Frankie was different, but that was not how I'd expected her to react. Oh well, people process grief in different ways. Speaking of processing, I tried to probe my own feelings. The shock was starting to wear off, to be replaced by, what? I haven't even cried, I realized. The more I analyzed my emotions, the more I realized that I was still angry. Well, of course you're angry. You're angry at the maniac who assaulted and murdered your wife. But that wasn't all. I went back to our bedroom and looked at Helen's closet filled with all her clothes. That's when it hit me. I'm still mad at Helen. Maybe, I thought, I'm angry because she's left me alone, even though that was hardly her choice. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized I was still angry for the way she treated me. Disrespect was disrespect, and if she was still alive, she'd probably still be treating me the same way. I felt the heat rise in my body and knew I'd touched on the raw nerve of truth. Her death hadn't changed the way I felt. I thought about her body lying out there in the woods, trying to generate some sympathy. I couldn't do it. I'll just have to wait. Maybe I'll feel different later. The rest of the day passed in a haze. I wandered through the house, doing little chores just to keep myself occupied. I noticed some things on the bookshelf that Helen had bought, little knickknacks that she thought were whimsical and I hated. I threw them in the trash. At one point, I went to my computer to check my email, only to turn it off when I saw the dozens of inquiries and expressions of sympathy. I can't deal with that now. As it grew dark, I pulled all the drapes closed and turned off all the outside lights. I'd heard once that was a sign that the family didn't want visitors. I knew I didn't want them, not then, maybe not ever. When I finally got ready for bed that night, it felt strange going to the bedroom, knowing Helen would never be there again. I mentally shook my head. Mickey, you were so screwed up. Strangely, I slept well that night, unbothered by ominous dreams. Maybe you're still in shock. I got up and had cereal and coffee for breakfast, then sat around trying to decide what to do next. Should I go into the office? Should I start answering all those emails? Should I just stay hidden for the day? Before I could drive myself nuts trying to figure it out, I decided to turn my phone back on. I hadn't wanted to talk to anyone yesterday, and, as I expected, my voicemail box was full. I quickly scanned the list of callers, and then jumped when my phone started to ring. Probably more condolences, I thought. But before I hit the ignore option, I noticed the call was from Detective Marshall. I better answer. Mickey. Her voice rang in my ear. I wanted to let you know right away. We caught the ring collector. What? You're kidding me. What happened? The bastard tried to kidnap another woman, but this time someone saw what was happening and called 911. We caught him before he could harm her. The excitement quieted in her voice. Look, I know it's not much consolation to you with Helen gone, but at least we'll be able to get justice for her. No, that's okay. It's fantastic that you got him. I mean, I wish it could have been sooner, but at least he's not going to get away unpunished. And he won't be able to hurt anyone else, thank God. I paused and thought for a moment. So what happens next? He's in interrogation right now, and they tell me he's making a full confession. It'll probably be all over the news, but feel free to call me if there's anything in particular you want to know. Okay, Nora, and thanks for calling. I'm still having a hard time processing everything that's happened, but this really helps. The next few days were schizophrenic, trying to deal with Helen's death on the one hand and feeling relieved they'd caught the monster who'd hurt her and so many others. But the calm after the storm was not to last. I was working in my office when there was a knock at my door. Before I could get up, the door opened and Nora walked in. She wasn't smiling. I have some bad news, Mickey. We've been over your wife's murder with the ring collector. He says he didn't do it. I gaped at her. He's lying, of course he did it. Her expression didn't change. He's confessed to all the other murders. Mickey told us details that we didn't share with the public. But he swears he didn't kill Helen. But that's not all. We found his collection of rings and have accounted for all of them. He didn't have Helen's. I don't understand. There's worse news, Mickey. We ran a DNA test on him and compared it to the semen that was left in Helen's vagina. It didn't match. But that's not the end of it, because we did find a match. Whose? Yours, Mickey. It matched your DNA. No, that's impossible. I shook my head in confusion. We hadn't had sex in 2 weeks. She'd been standing with her hands behind her. Now she brought them around front to display the handcuffs she'd been holding. With a stare that seemed filled with disappointment, she intoned, Mickey Duncan, you're under arrest for the murder of your wife, Helen Duncan. I looked around wildly, and that's when I noticed the burly cop standing outside my door. Don't make this any more difficult than it has to be, Mickey, she urged. I heaved a desperate sigh, then reluctantly held out my hands for her. Just then Billy rushed to the doorway. What the hell is going on, Mickey? He yelled. I don't understand either, Billy, but I need you to get me a lawyer, okay? He nodded as Nora took my arm and led me away. Booking, photographs, fingerprints, everything went by in a blur until finally I found myself sitting in a holding cell, stunned and disbelieving. Is this real or another nightmare? After a while, I heard footsteps coming in my direction, and when I looked up, I saw Nora Marshall standing outside my cell with her arms crossed on her chest. "Nora," I pleaded, "I didn't do this." She stared at me with sadness in her eyes, then turned and walked away. Later, the same official who took me to the holding cell came to the door. "You've got a visitor, Duncan," he said curtly, and then Billy appeared. Mickey, I don't know what's going on. This has to be some terrible mistake. Did you have any luck finding me an attorney?" "Yeah, I got a recommendation from the firm who handles our corporate work. His name is Maxwell. They said he's very experienced, has represented lots of criminals. Well, you know, lots of people in your situation." I waved away the awkwardness. All I care about is if he can help me get out of here long enough that I can figure out what the hell is going on. The next few weeks were crazy. Sometimes the hours seemed to stretch on forever, other times whole days had passed. I was indicted by a grand jury and arraigned before a judge, where I pleaded not guilty. For all that time, I was held in the city jail, slowly going crazy trying to comprehend what had happened to me. Maxwell, my attorney, was not very encouraging. He certainly knew his way around the criminal justice system, but he kept asking me to strike a plea bargain with the district attorney. I refused, which brought us to my bail hearing. I felt that if I could only get out of that cell, somehow I could find out how I'd been set up and by whom. The DA didn't want me out on bail at all. He cited the heinous nature of my crime and called me a flight risk. Maxwell pointed out that I had no prior criminal history and strong ties to the city. The judge compromised by setting bail at $1 million. "Max," I whispered to my attorney, "where in the hell am I going to get $1 million? All you have to come up with is 10%, $100,000. You can put up your business for it." I got a chance to huddle with Billy after the hearing. "The business is half yours, so I hate to ask, but do you think we can do it?" He didn't hesitate. "No sweat, bro. I know you're not going to head to Mexico on me. Besides," he winked, "if you do, you know I'll be coming after you." So there I was that afternoon, sitting in my house, free on bail, desperately trying to imagine who could have killed Helen and why. Maxwell had promised to comb through the evidence the state had against me to see if there were any chinks in the armor. But I figured that wasn't likely to solve my problem. I had to believe that Darren Browder was somehow involved, so I tried to puzzle it out. He and Helen were having an affair. I was positive of that. Suppose Helen became too attached, began making demands on Browder. Could he have killed her to get her off his back? Or what if Helen started blackmailing him? That could have raised the stakes for him even higher. Who else? I thought back to the night Helen disappeared. She and Nancy had gone dancing at that club. Nancy told me she'd hooked up with some guy and left Helen behind. But what if Nancy hadn't left? What if she and the other guy decided to have a threesome with Helen and the whole thing went wrong? Maybe, but it sounded pretty far out to me. And speaking of far out, maybe I needed to think even further outside the box. There was one person I knew who seemed obsessed by Helen, Frankie. Could she have met Helen that night and tried to persuade her to leave me? Could she have professed her love for Helen and been repulsed? God knows Frankie was strong enough to strangle Helen if she wanted to. Could she be the killer? But that's crazy. Helen was sexually assaulted. The killer had to be a man, didn't he? But no matter what crazy scenario I imagined, they all came back to the fact that the coroner found my semen in Helen. I didn't want to face it, but maybe I was the killer. Could I have done it and forgotten or blocked it out? As I thought back to that night, I started to remember things I didn't like. There's no question that I got drunk that Friday, so drunk that I blacked out. But could I have awakened in the middle of the night, gone out and done something so terrible that I didn't want to remember it? But how could I do something so evil and then calmly do yard work on Saturday? Was I some kind of cold-blooded monster? Oh, shit, that reminds me, why were my work boots all muddy when I went out to mow the lawn? I'm always careful to clean up after my chores. What if Helen had come home that night and I flew into a rage? Could I have assaulted her, strangled her, and then hauled her body out to Burnham Woods? The thought made me sick. Then I remembered my dreams, the terrible anger I'd felt toward Helen, followed by those ominous visions of dark woods and depression. But those were just my reaction to Helen staying out all night, weren't they? Weren't they? You've got to stop thinking like this, I told myself. You need to get out of the house and away from all these reminders of Helen. I glanced over at the wall clock and saw it was after 5 o'clock, so I called Billy. Hey, bro, how about meeting me over at Louie's? I need somebody to help me make sense of everything that's going on. He agreed and was sitting in a booth in the back with a beer for me when I walked in. While we sipped on the first round, he brought me up to speed on what was going on with the business. Then, after he got us a second round, he encouraged me to talk about what was going through my mind. I told him I'd been racking my brain trying to come up with some explanation for what had happened to Helen, someone else who might have done it. I told him about all my wild theories and crazy scenarios, none of which explained why my DNA was the only one they'd found. Billy tried to encourage me. I've been thinking about that, Mickey. Maybe the lab guys made a mistake. Maybe they found your juice left over from the last time you and Helen did it. I bet they found it and didn't bother to look any further. I don't know, Billy. That sounds pretty unlikely, and I don't know I could prove something like that anyway. I shook my head, and the room spun for a moment. Damn, how many beers have I had? This is only my second, isn't it? Now I can't remember. I rubbed my eyes and Billy stared at me. Are you okay, Mickey? Yeah, I'm fine. The beer just seems to be sneaking up on me. Maybe it's because I was dry all the time I was in jail. Just then I heard my cell phone ring, and when I managed to focus on the display, I saw it was Max Maxwell calling. Hey, Billy, I gotta take this. It's my lawyer. I stood up and staggered a little as I stepped out through the back door so I could hear better. I had to lean against the wall to steady myself. Hey, Max, what's happening? He hesitated a moment, and I wondered if I sounded drunk. Mickey, I just learned something that may help our case. You know the DNA test the police did? How can I forget it? Well, guess what? They only test a small fraction of the DNA because that's usually all they need to find a match. That's what they did with Helen. The DNA in the semen was a match with yours, so that was enough. The alley kept wanting to move, so I tried to prop myself more firmly against the wall. Okay, Max, but how does that help me? What if the killer has DNA that's almost identical to yours? My head was really swimming now. You mean I've got a clone out there? Or an evil twin? Have you been drinking, Mickey? This is not a joke. Listen to what I'm saying. I tried to think, but nothing happened. Then the door opened and Billy came out. There you are, bro, he snickered. You better let me help you. He took the cell phone from me, put my arm around his shoulder, and I passed out. My head hurt like hell, and there was a bitter taste in my mouth. I raised my head only to bump into the tree behind me. Oh, well, looks like that dose of roofie I gave you is wearing off faster than the first one, Billy muttered. The last time I was afraid I'd killed you, so I cut way back. He shrugged his shoulders. Actually, I'd have preferred it if you'd kept sleeping. But, oh well. I shook my head to clear it, then tried to stand. That's when I realized I was sitting on the ground strapped to the tree behind me. Billy, what the hell is going on? Help me get free. I don't think so, bro. I went to a lot of trouble to get you here. I don't understand. What's happening? He walked over to stand in front of me, a sneer on his face. So here's what's happening. You've been stricken by remorse about what you did to Helen, so you came out to the woods where you killed her. You know they're going to convict you, so there's only one way out. You're going to take this gun, he held up an automatic in his gloved hand, and blow your brains out. It doesn't get much simpler than that. I stared at him in disbelief. You were the one who killed Helen. He laughed. I've been wanting a piece of your wife's fine ass for a long time, bro. I've been following her to that club, and I saw how hot she looked when she was dancing. So when you came whining to me that Friday about her going out with her 304 friend Nancy, I knew just where they'd be. Then it was a simple matter to drug you, take your sorry ass home, slip on your work boots, then drive your car to singles and doubles. When I got there, Nancy was just leaving with some sex hound. That left the door open for me to approach your loving wife, threaten to tell you all about her cheating around, and get her out to the car. One little love tap, and she was out like a light. When I got her out in the woods, I decided if she wanted to spread it around, there was no reason why I shouldn't knock off a piece too. Bro, you should have seen the panties that witch had on. She was planning to get laid, no doubt about it. So I helped myself, and it was fine, let me tell you. But afterwards she woke up and started screaming, and I couldn't have that. So I shut her up, permanently. I gasped in horror. A big smile came over his face. Truth is, I knew that was what was going to happen all along. That's why I set it up so you'd be the one to take the fall. Looks like I did a pretty good job of it, too. But you helped me. You agreed to put the plan up to raise bail. Why not? I wanted everyone to see what a loyal brother I was. Besides, I knew you weren't going anywhere. I was stunned at the transformation I was witnessing and horrified at the story he told me. All the while I was listening to him, I was desperately trying to think of a way out of this mess. Listen, Billy, help me get these straps off, and we'll figure out something. You know that suicide idea will never convince anyone. I can't shoot myself tied up like this. No, you can't, he snickered. But I can do it for you. No, Billy, it will be obvious what happened. I got that all figured out. After I put a bullet through your temple, I'll just unwrap all this strapping so they won't find any marks on your body. Then put the gun in your hand and fire a second shot off in the distance. They'll find you with the gun in your hand and powder burns on your fingers. With all that evidence, I don't think they'll even wonder why you didn't leave a note. His face turned hard. Enough talking, bro. It's time to finish this. Wait, Billy. At least tell me why. Why? Do you really have to ask? All my life I've been the little brother, the afterthought, second best. You were Dad's favorite. I was the disappointment. You were the star quarterback. I was on the second team. You got your MBA. I had to settle for technical school. Now he was pacing back in front of me, his anger building by the second. I thought maybe things would get better once I got out of school, but if anything, they got worse. When Dad left the business to us, Mr. I've got my MBA became the president, and I had to settle for working in the plant. Billy, you're vice president of operations. Shut up, he yelled. Everybody knows who was in charge, and it wasn't me. Then his voice got low and ugly. And when it came to women, you always had your pick. And who did you choose to marry? Just the hottest girl in the school. When you'd bring her around for the holidays, I used to go to bed and beat off thinking about her. Why couldn't I have someone like that? Why did you have to suck up all the attention, all the recognition? He shook his head as if throwing off a bad thought. But all that changes tonight, bro. You're gonna become a memory. But don't worry, they won't forget you. They'll remember you as the piece of shit who assaulted and murdered his hot wife when he found out what a cheating woman she was. They won't know whether to laugh or cry when they think about you. And I'll be the only one who knows the truth. Not the only one, Billy. Police department, drop your gun. We both looked up in amazement to see the slim shape of Nora Marshall step from behind a big maple, her Glock held in both hands and centered on Billy's chest. To my astonishment, Billy's voice changed tone completely. No, detective, you've got it all wrong. I followed Mickey out here and discovered he really was the killer. He came here to destroy some evidence. I captured him, and I was just about to call you guys. She said evenly. Then she turned to her right. Patrolman Jenkins, was the voice recorder on your body cam working? A uniformed cop stepped out from behind another huge old tree. Yes, ma'am. I got every word of it. The detective turned back toward us. Billy Duncan, you're under arrest for sexual assault and murder. Now drop that gun and put your hands behind your head. Okay, you win, Billy said, and started to raise his hands. Suddenly he jumped toward me, dropped to one knee, and fired off a shot at the patrolman. The officer went down, and as he swiveled toward Nora, I bent my knees and lashed out with both feet, catching him on his hip. Off balance, he sprawled on the ground. With an angry howl, he sat up and raised the gun in my direction. But before he could pull the trigger, a shot rang out, catching him in the back and knocking him to one side. He groaned and shuddered, then lay still. Nora came running over, her gun leveled at Billy the whole time. As soon as she reached him, she prodded him in the back with her foot. When he didn't move, she stepped on the wrist of his gun hand, pinning the weapon to the ground. He still didn't move, so she bent down and carefully pulled it out of his fingers. Then she came over to me. "Are you okay?" she asked breathlessly. "I think so." She handed Billy's gun to me. "Keep an eye on him. I need to go help Jenkins." Then she was gone into the shadows. I sat watching the blood ooze out of Billy's back. He never moved. A gasp came from the trees, and I looked up to see Nora helping Jenkins walk toward me. "Damn, I feel like I've been kicked by a mule," he groaned. Her grin was more relief than humor. "Just think how you'd feel if you hadn't been wearing your vest." Then she was on her phone, calling for support. Once she heard they were en route, she came over and began untying the straps that bound me to the tree. I really didn't think he'd resist. I could feel her hand shaking. "That was quick thinking the way you kicked him." I just reacted, didn't have time to think. Then it hit me. "How did you know to find us here?" She smiled. "I've been keeping an eye on you ever since you got out on bail." "Oh, so you really thought I'd done it?" The smile grew broader. "No, I was pretty sure you weren't guilty. I've seen wife killers before, and you didn't act like one. Even when we got the DNA match, I still had doubts." "Hey," I slapped my forehead. "You need to talk to Max, my lawyer. He found out something was wrong with your DNA test." She shrugged her shoulders apologetically. "I'm sorry about that. When the match came back positive, we never thought about the possibility that your brother would have almost identical DNA. I looked back at Billy's body lying crumpled on the dirt. That seemed right. Even in the end, he was still an afterthought. I was making slow progress getting the house the way I wanted it to look. It had taken me forever to get all of Helen's clothes and shoes packed up. I had to rent a van to haul it all to the Goodwill store. The same for all the tchotchkes and knickknacks she'd bought. Maybe someone else would like them, not me. There weren't all that many photographs, but they'd taken even longer for me to go through. I didn't really want any reminders lying around, but how much of your past life do you want to erase? And that was just the photos with Helen in them. What should I do about all the shots of Billy and me? Finally, I just boxed everything up and hauled them up to the attic. I'll decide about them some other time. Just as I got downstairs, the doorbell rang, and when I opened it, I was surprised to see Detective Marshall standing there. Come in, I urged her, and she hesitantly came to take a seat in my living room. Is everything okay? I asked. There's nothing. No, she said hastily. It's not that at all. I just came by to bring these to you. With that, she reached into her purse and pulled out Helen's wedding rings. She shook her head. Billy had them in his pocket. He must have taken them from Helen when he, well, you know. Anyway, we think he was going to plant them on you as more proof you'd killed her. She gave a little smile. I thought you might want them back. Thanks, Nora. You didn't have to go to all that trouble. Actually, I'm not sure what I want to do with them. I've been going through Helen's things, purging everything I didn't want to keep. You understand? She nodded. Then she stood up abruptly. Well, I've taken enough of your time, so I'll let you get back to your work. I stood too, feeling like I should say something, but not certain what that was. She hesitated and then seemed to make a decision. She opened her purse again, reached in, and pulled out a small rectangle of paper. Stepping forward, she placed it in my hand. Here's my card with my number on it. If you ever want to ask me anything at all, just call me. She looked at me intently, then turned and walked out the door. I stood there confused. She already gave me one of her cards, and she told me everything had been cleared up. I stepped to the window and watched her walk to her car. She really was a good-looking woman. I looked at the card in my hand again and smiled, then put her card in my wallet. I need to keep this safe. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.